15 years ago, Mason Calder, a poor black single father, pulled a shivering white child out of the rain beneath a Baltimore bus shelter. 15 years later, that same man stood in a courtroom branded a fraud, about to lose the $900 million logistics empire he had built with his own hands. And the one person who could save him had vanished without a trace. Then the courtroom doors swung open and the girl walked in wearing a lawyer's suit. But why had she abandoned her father when he needed her most? The rain came down hard the night Mason Calder found her. It was the kind of rain that turned the harbor district of Baltimore into a smear of gray that drummed against the tin roofs of the loading docks and ran in black rivers along the gutters. Mason was walking home from a double shift at the port, his coveralls soaked through his hands, aching the way a mechanic's hands ache after 12 hours of wrestling with engines that did not want to run. He was 31 years old, a widower with a 4-year-old son asleep at a neighbor's apartment, and he wanted nothing in the world except a hot shower and 6 hours of sleep before the morning whistle called him back. Then he saw the shape under the bus shelter. At first, he thought it was a bundle of discarded clothing, the sort of thing that collected in the corners of the city when no one was looking. But the bundle was shivering, and when the headlights of a passing truck swept across the shelter, he saw a small white face no more than 9 years old, framed by wet hair plastered flat against her cheeks. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. Her lips had gone the pale blue of someone who had been cold for a very long time. Mason stopped walking. A different man might have kept moving. It was late, and the city had a way of teaching people to mind their own troubles. A black man in a poor neighborhood who stopped for a strange white child in the dark was a man inviting questions he could not afford to answer. Mason understood all of that in the space of a single breath. He also understood that the girl was not going to survive the night if the rain kept up and no one stopped. He did not rush her. He crouched down at the far edge of the shelter several feet away, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers instead of looming over her, the way grown men loomed over frightened children. "That's a bad spot you picked," he said gently. "Roof leaks right over where you're sitting. Come about 2 feet to your left, you'll stay drier." The girl stared at him. She did not move. "My name's Mason," he went on in the same easy voice he used on skittish engines and skittish men. "I work down at the port. I'm not going to touch you, and I'm not going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go. But it's colder than it ought to be, and I've got a thermos of coffee that's still warm, and I'd hate to drink it in front of you and be rude about it." Something in the ordinariness of the words seemed to reach her. She shifted a few inches out of the drip of the leak. He learned her name slowly, the way you earn a thing rather than take it. Willa Brooks. She did not say where her parents were, and the flatness in her voice when he asked told him not to press. He gave her the coffee and then the sandwich he had been saving, and then his own jacket, which swallowed her whole, and left him standing in the rain in his shirt sleeves. And here was the part that separated Mason Calder from the men who would later sit in judgment of him. He did not try to be a hero. He did not scoop the child up and carry her off into the night, deciding for her what came next. He walked to the payphone on the corner in full view of her so she would not think he was abandoning her, and he called the police. He waited with her until the officers came. He answered their questions plainly, and when the paperwork began, the long, grinding paperwork of a child with no one to claim her. He did not disappear the way most people disappeared when paperwork appeared. The looks came, of course. He felt them from the officers, from the social workers, from the clerks at the county office over the weeks that followed. A single black father, poor already raising one boy, asking to take in a white girl who was not his blood. He saw the suspicion move behind their eyes before they could hide it. He answered every question. He signed every form. He showed up to every appointment in a clean shirt with his son on his hip, and he outlasted the doubt through sheer patient refusal to be anything other than exactly what he was. On the day it became official, Mason brought Willa to the small row house he could barely afford, and he did something she would remember for the rest of her life. He took a key off his own ring, the brass worn soft and gold at the edges from years in his pocket, and he pressed it into her palm and closed her small fingers around it. "This is yours now," he said. "Not borrowed, yours. And I want you to hear me, Willa, because I'm only going to say it once, and then I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." He waited until she looked up at him. "In this house, nobody gets left out in the rain. Not ever. Not you, not Graham, not anybody who comes through that door needing a dry place to stand. You understand me?" She did not answer with words. She closed her hand tighter around the key, and that was answer enough. The neighbors talked. Let them talk, Mason thought. He had buried a wife, and he had learned the only thing worth learning from grief, which was that the world was full of people standing out in one kind of rain or another, and that a man was measured not by the color of the hand he extended, but by whether he extended it at all. The girl and the boy who grew up together in that narrow house did not see at first that anyone thought their family was strange. They only saw a father who came home smelling of diesel and salt water, who could not cook much beyond eggs and burned toast, who checked their homework with a mechanic's stubborn patience, and who never once in 15 years broke the promise he had made under a leaking bus shelter in the rain. That was the foundation. Everything that came after the money, the towers of it, the enemies it drew like moths to a burning window, was built on top of that single night and that single key. And the men who would one day try to take it all from Mason Calder made the same mistake that men of their kind always made. They looked at the foundation and saw only the money. They never once thought to fear the promise. Graham grew up broad-shouldered and quick, with his hands more comfortable inside the guts of a machine than in any room full of talking. Willa grew up quiet and watchful, the kind of child who read the same page 3 times, not because she was slow, but because she was learning to see what was underneath the words. Where Graham took after his father in the body, Willa took after him in something harder to name: a refusal to look away from a thing simply because it was uncomfortable to keep looking. Mason noticed it early. He noticed the way she argued not to win, but to understand. He noticed the way she filed things away. "You've got a lawyer's mind," he told her once when she was 15, and had spent an hour taking apart the fine print of a contract he'd brought home, finding 2 clauses that would have cost him dearly. "You see the trap before it springs. Somebody in this family ought to," she said, not looking up from the page. He laughed at that, a big warm laugh that filled the little kitchen, but he never forgot it. And when the time came years later, that laugh would seem to him like the first small crack of light under a door that had not yet opened, the first sign of the thing that would in the end save everything he had. For now, though, there was only the house and the key and the rain that had stopped, and a promise that a man intended to keep no matter what it cost him. He had no idea yet what it would cost him. The empire did not begin as an empire. It began as 3 second-hand trucks, their beds rusted at the seams, purchased with money Mason Calder had saved a few dollars at a time across years of double shifts. He knew engines the way other men knew scripture, and he knew the harbor, which berths silted up, which dispatchers could be trusted, which cargo sat waiting because no one small enough and hungry enough had bothered to move it. He started by hauling the loads the big carriers thought beneath them. He was on time when no one else was. He shook hands and kept his word, and word in a business built on broken promises turned out to be worth more than capital. 3 trucks became 30. 30 became a yard, and the yard became a rail spur, and somewhere in the long grind of those years, the thing acquired a name: Calder Harbor and Rail, and then a headquarters, and then a valuation that made the men in the glass towers downtown stop laughing and start watching. By the time Willa was finishing law school, the company that had started with 3 rusted trucks was worth $900 million. Mason had sold the first of those 3 trucks to pay for her first year of tuition. He never told her that. She found out anyway, the way she found out most things, by reading what people left unsaid. He had not changed with the money, and that was the first thing his enemies could not forgive. He still took his lunch in the yard, sitting on an overturned crate, with the drivers trading the same rough jokes he had traded when he was one of them. He still wore work boots to board meetings. He still on cold mornings walked the pier himself to make sure the newest hires had gloves that fit. To the men who ran the money, this was not humility. It was an insult. It suggested that everything they valued, the private dining rooms, the tailored suits, the careful distance from anyone who worked with their hands, was optional, unnecessary, even a little ridiculous. No one felt that insult more sharply than Barton Kingsley. Kingsley had come in early, back when the company still smelled of diesel and desperation, and he had put real money on the table when the banks would not. In his own mind, this made him the true architect of everything that followed. He had convinced himself over the years that Mason Calder was a lucky mechanic who had stumbled into a fortune and needed men of breeding to keep it running. That Mason ate with the drivers, that Mason was celebrated in the business pages as a self-made man, while Kingsley's name went unmentioned. These were not small slights to a man like Barton Kingsley. They were a wound he picked at daily, until the wound became a purpose. The woman who gave that purpose its shape was Priscilla Van Dorn. Van Dorn ran a hedge fund, the way a surgeon runs a blade, and she looked at Calder Harbor and Rail the way a butcher looks at a steer, not as a living thing, but as a set of cuts to be sold at the highest price. Broken up and sold in pieces, she calculated the company was worth considerably more to the right buyers than it was as the stubborn, employee-heavy, unfashionably loyal operation Mason insisted on running. All she needed was someone on the inside, someone with a grievance and a vote. Kingsley was both. What they needed to take the company was to take Mason's control of it, and to do that, they had to make the most beautiful thing about him look like the ugliest. Years before, in a lawyer's office downtown, Mason had signed a set of papers he never discussed with anyone. Willa had been there, a sharp young law student who went over every clause twice before she let him sign. When it was done, he had put the pen down and looked out the window at the harbor for a long moment. If there's ever a day I'm not clear-headed enough to protect the few thousand people out on that pier, he had said, "You'll know what to do. That's all this is, Willa. It's a wall. I'd rather build it now while nobody thinks they need it than wish I had it later." She had told him she understood. Neither of them spoke of it again. It was Mason believed the quiet kind of insurance a careful man buys and hopes never to use a folder in a drawer, a promise turned into paper. Kingsley found that folder, and Kingsley, with Van Dorn's lawyers whispering in his ear, saw how it could be turned inside out. The lawsuit landed like a thrown stone through a window. Kingsley, acting as chairman, filed suit alleging that Mason Calder had been quietly looting his own company, draining its value into a private trust set up for the benefit of Willa Brooks. And here the scheme showed its real cruelty because it took the single most decent fact of Mason's life and sharpened it into a weapon. The girl was not his blood. The papers made much of that. A grown man diverting a fortune to an unrelated young woman he had brought in off the street, stated coldly enough, stripped of 15 years of love and burned toast and checked homework. It could be made to sound like exactly the thing the suit claimed it was. A con. A long, patient con, run by a man too humble to be suspected. The business press, which had spent years praising Mason as a self-made man, discovered overnight that it enjoyed watching a self-made man fall even more than it had enjoyed watching him rise. The headlines were merciless. Old photographs of Mason eating lunch with his drivers, once printed as evidence of his character, were now reprinted with captions that hinted at performance at calculation at a mask. The court moved with terrible speed. A judge issued an emergency order. Mason had 72 hours before a hearing that would rule on freezing his voting control of the company, 72 hours before the thing he had built with his own hands could be pried out of them and handed to the very men who wanted to sell it for parts. Mason read the order twice in the kitchen of the same narrow row house. He had never moved out of the house where the promise had been made. Then he took the old brass key off the counter where it always sat, worn soft and gold at the edges, and he closed it in his fist, and he stood a long while at the window watching the rain begin again. He had no idea standing there that the worst of it had not yet come. The worst of it was that Willa disappeared. She had been the first person he tried to reach when the suit was filed, not because he needed a lawyer, though God knew he needed one, but because she was the one whose steadiness had gotten him through every hard thing since the night he found her. He called. The phone rang out. He called the firm in New York where she had spent the last few years learning of all the trades in the world, the exact trade this fight would require, the untangling of financial fraud, the ugly arithmetic of corporate raids. Her assistant said in a careful voice that Miss Brooks was unreachable. Her apartment, when Graham drove up to check it, was dark and locked the male gathering behind the door. She was simply gone. Kingsley made sure the world noticed. Through friendly reporters, the story spread that even the daughter, even the girl Mason Calder had famously taken in, even she had cut and run at the first sign of trouble. If his own child would not stand by him, the whispers went, what did that tell you about the man? The very love that had defined Mason's life was now being used twice over to bury him. What almost no one knew was what Willa had left behind before she vanished. 2 days before she went dark, she had sent Graham a message. Not a call, not an email, a short text, the kind of thing that could be typed quickly and deleted quickly. Don't trust anyone inside the company. Don't come looking for me. I mean it. Graham had read it a dozen times. He did not know what to make of it. And in the days that followed, as the walls closed in on his father, that message curdled in him into something bitter. Graham was 19 now, all shoulders and quiet, most at home in the maintenance bays, where the language was torque and tolerance, and a problem either got fixed or it didn't. He loved his father with the fierce, wordless loyalty of a son who had watched that father give everything to 2 children and ask for nothing back. But somewhere down in him, in a place he was not proud of, there had always been a splinter where Willa was concerned. He had been 4 years old when she arrived, old enough to notice that his father's attention, which had been entirely his now, had to be shared. Old enough in the way of small children to wonder whether the strange girl in the too-big jacket was taking something that belonged to him. He had spent 15 years telling himself that Splinter was gone. Now, with his father drowning and Willa nowhere to be found, the splinter throbbed like a fresh wound. She set up the trust in her own name, Graham said to his father one night, unable to keep it in any longer. They were at the kitchen table, the same table the court papers spread between them. Her name, Dad, and the second things go wrong, she's on a plane. You want to tell me that's a coincidence? You want to tell me she's not exactly what they're saying she is? Mason looked at his son for a long time before he answered. I want to tell you, he said quietly, that you were 4 years old when she came to us, and you don't remember what she looked like under that bus shelter. I do. I've never been wrong about that girl. I'm not going to start being wrong about her now when it's hardest. That's not faith, Dad. That's just stubborn. Maybe there's no difference, Mason said. Maybe when it counts, there never was. Graham left the table without finishing the argument. But he did not leave the house, and he did not leave his father's side in the days that followed, and that, though neither of them could see it, yet would turn out to matter more than the argument. The hearing that everyone came to call the beginning of the end took place on a gray afternoon in a courtroom that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Kingsley's lead attorney was a smooth, silver-templed man named Elliot Wainford, the kind of lawyer whose fees alone announced that the people paying them did not expect to lose. Wainford did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He laid out a trail of financial documents, statements, transfers, the movement of money into the founding trust arranged so cunningly that each innocent transaction seemed to lean against the next, until the whole structure looked like guilt. He walked Mason through it on the stand with the patience of a man walking a bull toward a gate. Mr. Calder, Wainford said pleasantly, let us set aside interpretation and deal only in fact. Did you or did you not establish a trust into which company-connected assets were placed, and of which Miss Willa Brooks, a young woman to whom you are related by neither blood nor marriage, is a named beneficiary? Mason's temporary lawyer, an honest but overmatched man named Reyes, half rose to object, then thought better of it, which was its own kind of answer. Mason looked at the documents. He looked at the smooth, certain face of the man asking. Every honest bone in his body refused to lie, and the truth stated bare was a trap. I set up a trust, he said. Willa's name is on it. But it isn't. Thank you. That is responsive. Wainford was already turning away, already letting the admission hang in the air where the reporters could carry it out the doors. Nothing further at this time. By evening, the story had crossed the country. Calder admits transferring assets to adopted daughter. Stated that way, it was not even a lie. It was a truth with its heart cut out. And here it is, worth stepping back from the courtroom for a moment, because something happened in those days that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with people. The strange thing, the thing that ought to trouble anyone who watched it, was how much faster the crowd believed one accusation than it had ever believed 15 years of quiet decency. A man could spend a decade and a half keeping a promise nobody paid attention to and lose it all in a single afternoon to a headline. Perhaps that is because steady kindness is quiet by its nature, while a scandal knows how to shout. Or perhaps it is something less flattering than that. Perhaps people did not turn on Mason because they believed he was guilty. Perhaps they turned because it was a relief to believe it, because a man that good brought low was somehow easier to live beside than a man that good who stayed standing. His goodness had been a quiet accusation against everyone who had chosen less. His ruin let them off the hook. Whatever the reason, the tide went out, and Mason Calder stood on the exposed shore alone. Not entirely alone. In an office 2 floors below the executive suite, a woman named June Holloway had begun very quietly to grow uneasy. June had kept the company's records for 11 years. She was the sort of person the powerful tend not to notice. No title worth mentioning, no vote, no stake, which meant she saw a great deal precisely because no one thought her worth hiding things from. Lately, though, things had been hidden from her. Transparency reports she had personally filed had gone missing from the archive. Meetings that touched on the Van Dorn dealings were scheduled without her when for 11 years she had taken the minutes of every meeting that mattered. A woman with less experience might have assumed she was simply being left out. June had been left out of enough things in her life to know the difference between an oversight and a pattern. She started keeping copies. She did not know yet what they proved. She only knew in the marrow-deep way of a person who has watched paperwork for a living that documents did not walk out of an archive by themselves, and that the ones walking out were exactly the ones that would have made Barton Kingsley uncomfortable. She did not go to Mason. She was not sure in the poisoned air of those weeks whom it was safe to go to, but she thought of the quiet young man down in the maintenance bays, the son who had never once in all his years at the company treated her as invisible. And one evening she found Graham alone, and she set a folder on the workbench in front of him, and she said, "I don't know what this is yet, but I think somebody didn't want me to have it. And I think you might be the only person here I trust to look." Graham opened the folder. He did not understand the finance in it, but he understood from his own work that every system leaves a trace, that when a file is deleted, the system remembers who reached in and deleted it, even when the file itself is gone. He had access to those records. He had never had a reason to look before. Now he had a reason. 2 threads then had begun to cross in the dark: a records clerk who had kept what she was not supposed to keep, and a mechanic's son who knew how to read the fingerprints a machine leaves behind. It was not yet a case. It was not yet even a theory. It was 2 people with pieces of something and no way to see the whole. And that, in the end, was the cruelty of it. On the eve of the hearing that would decide everything, the pieces existed, and no one could assemble them. Reyes, honest and overmatched, had no original documents to fight with, only Wainford's poisoned copies. The judge, a careful woman named Ellison, made it plain from the bench that without something new, a document, a witness, some solid ground to stand on, she would have little choice but to sign the preliminary order freezing Mason's control. Willa was still gone. No new witness, no new evidence, just a man on a shore with the tide going out and 2 people in a maintenance bay holding fragments they could not fit together. The night before the ruling, Mason did something he had never done in 15 years. He wavered. He sat alone in the dark kitchen with his phone in his hand, and for the first time, the thought he had refused to think came all the way in. What if I was wrong about her? Not wrong the way you misjudge a stranger wrong all the way down. Wrong about the one thing he had built his whole second life upon. The evidence, all of it pointed one way. His son had said it out loud. The world had said it. Every fact in every folder said the girl had used him and run. For a long moment, in the worst hour of the worst night, Mason came very close to believing it. He set the phone down. He picked it up. He thought about how simple it would be to let go, to accept the story everyone was telling him, to stop being the fool who kept faith in a girl who had vanished. Then his eyes fell on the old brass key sitting on the counter where it always sat. He did not pick it up. He only looked at it. And looking at it, he understood something about himself that the whole ordeal had been trying to teach him. It was not that he was certain Willa was innocent. He was not certain. Certainty had left him days ago. It was that if he threw away his faith in her now, then even if he won, even if he kept every dollar and every truck and every foot of that pier, he would have lost the one thing that had made him worth saving. He would have become a man who left someone out in the rain the moment it got hard, and a man like that had no business owning anything at all. So he chose, not to be sure, to trust anyway. There is a difference, and the difference costs something, and Mason paid it that night alone at his kitchen table. Perhaps that is the truest thing a self-made man ever learns. The great danger is not betrayal. The great danger is the moment when every piece of evidence you can see tells you to stop believing in someone, and you have to decide with nothing to hold on to whether to keep faith or let it fall. Mason kept it, not because he knew he was right, because he knew that a man who could only love people when it was safe had never really loved them at all. Morning came the way mornings do, indifferent to what they arrive upon. Mason put on his good shirt the way he had put on a clean shirt for every county appointment 15 years before. He and Graham drove to the courthouse together, father and son, and they walked into a courtroom that was already filling with reporters who had come to watch a good man lose. There was no Willa. There was no new evidence anyone knew of. There was June's folder and Graham's fingerprints in a system, but no one on that side of the aisle knew yet how to make the pieces speak, and there was no more time to learn. Judge Ellison took her seat. She looked down at the order in front of her, the one that would freeze Mason Calder's control of everything he had built. She picked up her pen. In the front row, Mason reached over without a word and put his hand on his son's shoulder, the two of them, the last of the family that had started under a leaking bus shelter, sitting together in the trap that had been so carefully built around them. Faith is not the same as seeing how the story ends. Sometimes it is only the decision to stand still in the dark one more hour, to keep the porch light on a little longer, so that the person you love has time enough to find the way back. The pen never touched the paper. The courtroom doors swung open with a sound that cut through the low murmur of the reporters, and every head turned at once. A young woman walked in out of the gray light of the hallway, and for a moment Mason Calder did not breathe. She wore a dark, well-cut suit and carried a leather case, and she moved down the center aisle with the calm of someone who had rehearsed this walk 100 times in her mind. 15 years fell away in an instant, and Mason saw again underneath the lawyer's composure the small face he had found under a leaking roof in the rain. Willa Brooks had come home. Judge Ellison set down her pen. "This is a closed proceeding, counselor. State your business or leave my courtroom." "Willa Brooks, Your Honor." She reached the front of the room and set her case on the table. "And my business is that this court is about to sign an order based on a story with the ending torn out. I'm here to put the ending back." A ripple went through the room. At the defense table, Reyes stared. In the front row, Graham had gone very still, the bitterness of weeks caught in his throat all at once, unsure whether he was looking at his father's salvation or the final proof of everything he had feared. Wainford rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this is theater. Miss Brooks is the named beneficiary of the very trust at the center of this case. She is the person who allegedly received the diverted assets. She cannot simply walk in and—" "You're right. Willa said, turning to face him, and the two clear words stopped him cold. She looked back to the bench. I want to be very clear with the court about what I am and what I am not. I am not here as my father's defense counsel. I would never stand at that table because Mr. Wainford is correct about one thing. I have an interest in this matter, and the law does not let me pretend otherwise. Mr. Reyes remains lead counsel of record, and any formal examination will run through him. She rested one hand on the leather case. I am here in the only two capacities the law does allow me. First, as a witness, because I know things about this case that no one else in this room knows. And second, as the independent trustee holding the reserve voting authority of the Calder Founding Trust, an authority this company granted in writing 6 years ago. I'm not here to defend my father. I'm here to testify and to enforce exactly the power this company handed me long before any of these gentlemen decided to steal it. The word steal dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond. Your Honor, she went on, counsel has spent 2 days describing a trust he has clearly never read. With the court's permission, I'd like to fix that. May I approach with the original founding instrument? Ellison's eyes moved from Willa to Wainford, whose smooth certainty had developed for the first time a hairline crack. You may. Willa opened the case and drew out a bound document, its cover soft with age, and handed copies to the clerk and to the defense. What Mr. Kingsley has described to this court as a vehicle for looting, she said, is the opposite of what it is. It's a firewall. She let them turn to the first marked page. 6 years ago, my father did something almost no founder ever does willingly. He built a trap not to catch anyone else, but to catch himself and anyone who might one day sit in his chair. The Founding Trust holds a reserve block of voting control that stays dormant, invisible, doing nothing at all under one condition. It activates only if fraud is committed from inside the board of this company. The instant that happens, control doesn't flow to an heir. It doesn't flow to a buyer. It flows to a single independent trustee bound by law to act in the interest of the company and its workers and to no one else. She looked at Kingsley then for the first time, and her voice did not rise. The thing Mr. Kingsley called evidence of a con is the con's undoing. He filed a lawsuit screaming that my father built a secret mechanism to seize control of this company. He was right. My father did. What Mr. Kingsley never understood is that the mechanism only wakes up when someone on his own side of the table commits fraud. By dragging this trust into the light and demanding the court examine it, he has done the one thing guaranteed, to turn it against him. The silence that followed was the silence of a room reorganizing everything it thought it knew. Judge Ellison read for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then set the document down with the care of someone handling something heavier than paper. The court is going to want a great deal more than your characterization, Miss Brooks. You'll have it, Your Honor. Every word. She turned to Reyes, and through him the machinery of it began to move. The first witness he called at Willa's direction was June Holloway. June came to the stand in a plain gray cardigan, gripping her folder as though it were the only solid object in the room, and 11 years of being invisible fell away as she began quietly to speak. She told the court about the transparency report she had personally filed and then watched disappear from the archive. She told them about the meeting she had been shut out of after 11 years of taking their minutes, and when Reyes asked her whether documents could vanish from a corporate archive on their own, she almost smiled. Documents don't walk, sir, she said. Somebody carries them. That was where Graham's piece fit in. Reyes entered the system access logs. The young man had pulled the quiet, patient fingerprints every machine keeps whether or not anyone thinks to look. The record showed with a plainness no amount of Wainford's eloquence could soften exactly which credentials had reached into the archive and deleted June's reports and when. They belonged to Barton Kingsley, and layered against the timeline of the Van Dorn negotiations The logs told a story a child could follow. The reports had been erased in the same week. Kingsley had accepted what his own emails called a consulting fee in exchange for delivering 51% of the company into Priscilla Van Dorn's hands at a fraction of its worth. Mason turned in his seat and looked at his son. Graham was staring straight ahead at the witness stand, jaw tight, and it was in that moment, watching the evidence he himself had unearthed close like a hand around the men who had framed his father, that the last of the splinter finally worked its way out of him. He had spent weeks certain Willa had run because she was guilty. She had run, it was turning out, so that he and June could do exactly this without anyone stopping them. The boy who had doubted her was the one whose work was now saving her name along with his father's. Wainford, to his credit, did not go down without reaching for the cruelest thing left on the table. When his turn came, he abandoned the finances entirely and went after the witness herself, Miss Brooks. He said, "The court should understand the credibility of the person orchestrating this remarkable performance. Is it not true that you were at one time a homeless child, a runaway of no known family pulled off a public street? Is that the character we're to accept as this company's incorruptible guardian?" The room tensed. It was an ugly thing to say, and it was meant to be. Mason's hands closed into fists in his lap. Willa did not flinch. She looked at Wainford the way she had once looked at fine print at a kitchen table, seeing the trap and refusing to step in it. "Yes," she said simply, "I was a child with nothing in the rain, and a man who owed me not one thing in this world stopped anyway. So let me tell you what that taught me, Mr. Wainford, since you'd like to make it the center of this. A debt is something you pay to be free of. A promise is something you keep because of who you are. Mr. Kingsley took money and called it a fee. My father made a promise under a bus shelter and spent 15 years keeping it for free. If the court wants to know which of us it can trust, I'd start there." Wainford had nothing to follow it with. But Willa was not finished, and what she did next answered the question that had hung over the whole ordeal, the question Graham had thrown at his father across the kitchen table, the question the headlines had feasted on. Why had she vanished? "There's one more piece of evidence," she told the court, "and I need to explain why I have it, because my absence these past weeks has been made into its own accusation. I'm told the story is that I abandoned my father." She drew a small recorder from the case. "The truth is that 3 weeks ago, before any of this reached a courtroom, representatives of the Van Dorn Fund came to me in New York. They knew what I was, the reserve trustee, the one person who could wake the firewall up. So they tried to buy my absence. They offered me a great deal of money to simply not be reachable when the hearing came." She set the recorder on the rail. "I understood 2 things in that meeting. The first was that if I refused them to their faces, they would know the firewall was a live threat, and they would spend every hour before this hearing burying the evidence deep enough that no one would ever find it. The second was that if I appeared to take the bait, if I went dark, if I let them believe they had bought a frightened girl who'd run rather than fight, they would relax. They would get sloppy. They would leave the trail exactly where June Holloway and Graham Calder could find it." Her eyes went to the front row, to the father who had kept faith with nothing to hold on to, and to the brother who had doubted her and dug anyway. "So I let them think they'd won. I cut off every line of contact because I knew they were watching all of them. They had people inside the company monitoring calls and mail, which is the whole reason I couldn't warn anyone without warning them too. I disappeared on purpose, and I let the people I love most in the world believe the worst of me for 3 weeks because it was the only way to keep them safe and keep this from being buried. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I would do it again." She pressed the button. The recording filled the courtroom, a Van Dorn representative's voice, unmistakable, naming a sum, naming the arrangement, naming the 51% it was all meant to deliver. It was not a fragment. It was the whole rotten thing spoken aloud by the people who had built it, captured by the girl they had been arrogant enough to underestimate. When it ended, no one in the room spoke. Wainford sat down without being told to. Barton Kingsley had gone the color of ash. Judge Ellison let the silence hold a moment longer. Then she gathered the documents before her into a neat stack. When she spoke, her voice had the flat finality of a gavel already falling. She found that the founding instrument was authentic, valid, and exactly what Willa Brooks had represented it to be. She ordered an immediate halt to all pending transactions with the Van Dorn Fund. She removed Barton Kingsley from the board and referred both him and Priscilla Van Dorn to the district attorney for criminal investigation into fraud and bribery. And she vested the reserve voting authority of the company temporarily and under the court's supervision in its lawful independent trustee, restoring to Mason Calder at a stroke control of everything the men in the glass towers had so nearly carried off. The order that was meant to end Mason's empire ended his enemies instead. The days after moved quickly the way things move once a dam has broken. Kingsley and Van Dorn vanished into the slow machinery of the courts, their names transformed overnight, from feared to indicted. The company Mason had nearly lost turned out to be steadier than anyone downtown had guessed, because it had always rested on something the raiders never bothered to value: the loyalty of the few thousand people out on the pier who had never once doubted the man who ate lunch on an overturned crate beside them. Mason rebuilt with the people who had saved it. Graham took charge of the technical operations, and the appointment carried a weight it never would have carried before because everyone now knew it was the son's own hands, reading the fingerprints in a machine that had helped pull the whole scheme into the light. June Holloway, who had kept what she was not supposed to keep, was given proper authority over the company's records and its transparency. At last, no longer invisible, no longer a woman, things could quietly disappear around. And Willa returned to New York and to her firm, taking the role of the company's outside legal counsel rather than any seat within it, keeping the clean line of independence she had insisted on in the courtroom. She would guard the wall. She would not stand behind it. There was one conversation that mattered more than any title. Graham found her the evening before she flew back out on the pier where their father had walked the boards for 20 years. For a while, the two of them just watched the water and the cranes and the lights coming on across the harbor. "I thought you ran," Graham said finally. "I told Dad you were exactly what they said you were. I looked him in the eye and said it." "I know." Willa kept her eyes on the water. "I was counting on you thinking it a little. If my own brother believed it, they'd believe it too." "That's a rotten thing to count on." "It was a rotten thing to do." She turned to look at him. "I'm sorry, Graham. Not for the plan was right and it worked. I'm sorry it cost you 3 weeks of hating me. I knew it would and I let it, and that's the part I'll have to live with." Graham was quiet for a moment, working through something he had carried since he was 4 years old, and had watched a girl in a too-big jacket walk into his house and into his father's heart. "You were scared too," he said. "It was not a question. Back then, under that bus stop, you were as scared of being left as I was of you taking my place. Every day for about the first 2 years," Willa admitted. "It's a hard thing to believe a door won't get shut on you again. I think that's why I understood the wall Dad built better than he did. I knew exactly what it feels like to need one." Graham let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and something between them that had been clenched for 15 years finally let go. "Welcome home," he said. And this time, he meant it all the way down. Mason gathered the whole company at the pier a week later. Not the board, not the lawyers, the whole company, the drivers and the dock workers and the clerks, the people who did the actual work of the thing he had built. He stood on the same kind of overturned crate he had always taken his lunch on, and he did not say much because he had never been a man of many words. He told them that a company was not its valuation and not its name on a building. He told them it was a promise a lot of people made to each other to show up and do the work and not leave anyone standing out in the weather alone. He told them that promise had very nearly been sold out from under them by men who thought it was worth nothing, and that it had been saved by a records clerk who kept her copies, and a young man who knew how to read a machine, and a young woman who had once been a child in the rain. He did not say her name when he said the last part. He did not have to. Half the people on that pier had watched her grow up. Afterward, when the crowd had thinned and the light was going gold over the water, Willa came and stood beside her father at the edge of the pier. She reached into her pocket and took out something small, and she pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers around it the way he had once closed hers. It was the old brass key, worn soft and gold at the edges, the same one he had given a shivering 9-year-old 15 years before the one he had gripped in his fist on the worst night of his life. She had carried it all this time. "You told me once that in your house nobody gets left out in the rain," she said. "I just wanted you to know the door goes both ways now." Mason looked down at the key in his palm, and this large, quiet man who had faced down a $900 million empire's worth of enemies without breaking found that he could not for a moment speak at all. Kindness given without any thought of return is a strange kind of planting. You scatter the seed in the rain, and you forget you ever held it because you never expected anything to grow. And then one day, when the storm you never saw coming finally breaks over your head, you look up and find that the thing standing between you and the worst of the weather is the very tree that grew in secret all those years from a seed you gave away for free and never counted on getting back. The rain had brought them together. In the end, it was a promise kept in both directions down the years and back again that held.